Good morning, Dawg Nation. I'm Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Breda Pest Management. We're going to have some fun because there's more of this leaked audio that we get from time to time from Kirby Smart. Obviously, one of the more famous pieces of leaked audio came from the Georgia-Florida game in, 2021, I believe. So when we have these hot mic moments from Kirby, we typically have some fun with it. But there is a deeper, I think, meaning to the latest hot mic moment from Kirby Smart. So we'll play it just because it's fun to hear it, but we'll also talk about what the deeper meaning might be. And let me tell you something. Another example of, we're going to hear some Jordan Hall today on the show. Jordan Hall is a good football player, but he's one of the best press conference guys Georgia's ever had. Really meaningful statements coming from him as he met with the media yesterday. So fun stuff. Mike Griffith here too, Davin Bellamy before we're done. He'll talk about how Georgia beats Florida. We're just face first in this cocktail party talk here right now, getting ready for the renewal of the great rivalry on Saturday and looking forward, we believe, to another Georgia win. So with all of that said, let's get right to it. It is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Breda Pest Management, and it begins right now.
Today's episode of DawgNation Daily is brought to you by Breda Pest Management. They handle bugs and critters.
Presented by DawgNation.com. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
We are going to have some fun for a couple of minutes with a theme that leads us into a talk about Georgia and Florida coming up on Saturday. Let me begin by telling you something that if you're very close to all of this, Georgia football and the conversations that happen around it, you're probably already aware of, is that sometimes when Kirby Smart appears in an official capacity as the coach of the Georgia Bulldogs speaking in a sanctioned press conference, sometimes Kirby does what he thinks that moment requires from him professionally speaking, and it's maybe not the most authentic representation of who Kirby Smart is. And as a media person, let me tell you this, I don't care. Look, it's his prerogative to do what he wants. We're going to have fun no matter what. I don't really need anything from anybody to do this show and never really have. So Kirby can go about his business however he wants to. Whatever produces wins for Georgia, we would say is probably fine for the most part. We don't have a whole lot of expectation about that sort of thing. We're just observers. And when we notice things, we're going to describe what we notice. And maybe another example of that here this week, where Kirby, in talking about the Georgia-Florida rivalry, the specific question was the fact that, as Kirby has said before, maybe right before the game, the stadium's a little bit more empty because people are enjoying the festivities of the cocktail party to the exact last moment they possibly can. So therefore, unlike some games, maybe you don't have a full stadium for warm-ups, if that's even true. That was the premise of the question. And in answering that, Smart also pivoted to what his overall message is about a game like Georgia and Florida. And once again, this is probably, if we're being honest, Kirby doing what he feels like the press conference role, that aspect of his professional career, probably requires from him, maybe not the deepest reflection of his authentic self, if we're being candid. This is Kirby earlier this week.
No, other than explain it. I mean, there's not a big rah-rah hoopla. You're responsible for your own ability to get up. If you can't get up for a game like this, you don't need to be playing.
So that's not a lie. Obviously, Kirby's telling I think a fairly basic truth that if you need external motivation to play in a game like this, you probably don't need to be out there because football's a dangerous sport and you just may get hurt because you don't have that fire inside of you to play the game. On one level, that is unmissably true. That's unmistakably true. Of course it is. But the notion that there isn't some extra motivation for Kirby in this game, some extra motivation for some of Kirby's hand-chosen assistants, some extra motivation for Georgia players in the rivalry game. Well, we're led to believe that's not exactly true. Of course, these guys want to win games like this just a little bit more. Their celebration at the end of games would suggest that's the case. Of course, you get a little extra juice for a rivalry. And yeah, you better be intrinsically motivated. And yeah, you better be focused around doing your job. But if you can add a little spice to that, if you can add a little to, use the phrase that Georgia uses a lot, fire, passion, and energy into that mix, well, of course, you'd want to do that. Kirby doesn't feel comfortable talking about that sort of thing in press conferences, which is his prerogative. But we know that behind the scenes, there's a little more going on than sometimes what Kirby lets on in these press conferences. In fact, we got some more information about that this week from Jordan Hall. And I was saying this to our video audience before our show began. Jordan Hall is literally one of my favorite press conferences from Georgia players they've ever had. Everything he says just sounds like the truest words that have ever been spoken. There is such a depth to his soul. I don't even know how to describe it necessarily, but he just comes across as like the most genuine dude ever when he's talking. And in speaking this week, he was talking about what I think is also a fairly obvious and recognizable point, that Florida played badly enough coming into this game that they fired their coach. But below that basic storyline, there's also a pretty good Florida team here, good on defense, for instance, better on offense than maybe the actual stat line would suggest. And that therefore, Jordan says, we got to be ready for the game. And we lean on the history of the rivalry to make sure we are ready for it. So Kirby says, man, we don't talk about this. We talk about the facts of you got to run the ball and not turnovers. But beyond that, we don't talk about the rivalry. There was the clip we played yesterday where Kirby said he doesn't even have any particular memories of the game, which is obviously nonsense. But Jordan Hall, in speaking about getting ready for this week's Florida game, gave us some better insight into what Kirby actually says and the other Georgia coaches actually say when it comes to this particular game. This is good from Jordan Hall.
I feel like this year more so than any other year, we actually respect it a lot more just because of, on paper, Florida doesn't really look like the greatest team when it comes record-wise. But you go sit down and watch the film, it's one of the better teams we played all year. I know us up front, O-line-wise, that's probably one of the best units we played. So I respect them in their game a lot more just by watching film and sitting down and watching that. But I feel like the rivalry in itself, Coach Smart has done a great job of implementing how much this rivalry means. And Coach Schumann put up an edit inside a team meeting room when Coach Smart first got here. He asked all the guys in the room who all in here is beating Florida. I think one person stood up. So since then, I guess it's been a big deal when it comes to Coach Smart implementing how much this rivalry means to him, because he lost to Florida a lot when he was here. So, we're just trying to bring that back and bring that juice back to the rivalry, make sure everybody knows this is a big game in this facility, and go on from there.
So listen, I'm not mad about this. It's Kirby's prerogative to do whatever he wants to. I just think it's funny that Kirby, in speaking to the media, says, no, we don't talk about this at all. If you need that extra motivation, then you're doomed to begin with. And Jordan Hall, who, as I said before, is just legitimately one of the most interesting players you could ever hear speak, says, no, Kirby's done a great job of telling what this rivalry is all about, what it means to him as a player, because they lost several times to Georgia going back to the past, replaying video they once showed from a meeting room going way back prior to the 2017 game when Georgia players were asked to stand up if they'd ever beaten Florida. Very few of them ever did. And Jordan Hall, who's obviously as businesslike in his approach as you could ever be to this particular game, says that meant something to me. That means something to the other players, and we want to make sure that we stay as focused on this rivalry as we possibly can because we know what it means to all the other guys that are there. Now, that's really interesting. Kirby does not feel like that's a thing he wants to speak about in a press conference. And if that's his choice, then by all means, that's his prerogative. But it is really interesting to me that privately, they do such a good job of talking about how much this rivalry means that Jordan Hall's like, gosh, I feel really motivated to play this game because of how well they've done in describing how much this has meant to people over such a long period of time. It's just kind of a funny disconnect between what reality is and what Kirby feels comfortable talking about during a press conference. In fact, in thinking about this topic, I kind of came to the conclusion that, a lot of people in life have sometimes you call it like a muse or a motivation, perhaps someone you try to emulate with your overall performance. We would suggest that when it comes to Kirby Smart's press conference demeanor oftentimes, and once again, this is his freedom to be however he wants to be, we would say that Kirby Smart's press conference demeanor perhaps is an emulation of maybe a pop cultural moment that he perhaps remembers from his childhood. Where does Kirby get his press conference style from? We would suggest maybe sometimes it's from a famous movie from the 1980s that perhaps you've seen. Judge for yourself on this. Is this where Kirby Smart got his press conference style? Judge this.
Yeah, I don't know that we have time to dig deep enough in the weeds.
In 1930, the Republican-controlled House of Representatives, in an effort to alleviate the effects of the... Anyone?
I think, obviously Billy Gonzalez will have an impact.
Passed the... Anyone? A tariff bill?
They have, you don't overhaul your entire offense in that short of time.
Which... Anyone raised or lowered? Raised tariffs in an effort to collect more revenue for the federal government.
So listen, I don't know, and by the way, great job by our guy Cody Chaffins telling me to put that together today. I don't know if Kirby grew up watching Ferris Bueller's Day Off, nor do I know if he knows the man who played the teacher in that situation, Ben Stein. I don't know that Kirby knows who Ben Stein is or that he watched Ferris Bueller, but sometimes you sort of get the impression that that's where the press conference stylings of Kirby Smart maybe come from. To a degree, you get the thought that might be the case. And the reason why we can laugh about that is because the press conference demeanor that sometimes Kirby puts forth, no, we don't talk about the rivalry at all. No, we don't do these things. No, if you need that, you're already doomed to begin with. The reason why we can kind of laugh about that is because it is so dramatically different than the real version of Kirby Smart that the Georgia players see all the time. In fact, we have maybe new evidence of that here today. One of our favorite things is these little leaked clips from Kirby Smart. Speaking of Georgia, Florida, one of the more famous ones of these came in 2021 from the halftime when he talked about in a very profane way what he wanted to see Georgia do with Florida. He talked about that. There are others, the famous "I want you to eat," and every now and then people are just happen to be wandering by the practice fields. Kirby speaks on the microphone during practice. It bellows across the rolling hills of the Athens campus. And every now and then we get a chance to hear a hot mic moment from Kirby during practice, which we would say is probably the more authentic version of Kirby, very different than the monotone, Ben-style, Ferris Bueller's Day Off version of Kirby that you sometimes get in press conferences. In fact, this week, we assume this is from this week because it showed up on the internet this week. We don't know that for a fact, but this is when it popped up on the internet. One of these accounts, I guess we'll give him credit here, I believe it's Sounds of UGA on TikTok. Now, the truth is, I'm pretty fluent in the internet, but sometimes this stuff gets passed around so much, it's hard to know who the origin source is, and maybe that's intentional because you're probably not supposed to do this. But nonetheless, we think it's Sounds of UGA on TikTok that had this first. What we think is a lot closer to the authentic version of Kirby, lay it into players during practice. This is the maybe more true version of Kirby.
Hey, you have it in the real world, they fire you. You ain't got no job. You're fired. You didn't do your job. You're fired.
So that ain't Ben Stein. That ain't Ferris Bueller's Day Off. That's Kirby being his more authentic self, telling players that if you don't do your job in the real world, you get fired. And we're obviously going to have that same expectation here when it comes to Georgia football. Now, let me take this into a more, I guess, sort of serious place just for a moment, because most of this is just for fun. We're just kind of laughing at, some of the stuff that's out there. That when you hear Kirby yelling like that, it may sound like it's just yelling for the purpose of yelling and it's emotion that's not properly bottled up or something like that. But it's always amazing to me that behind these hot mic moments, these little things that escape onto the internet, that oftentimes what seems like a throwaway line or just somebody blowing off some steam, perhaps you had coaches in your life when you were growing up that just occasionally just sort of blew off some steam, and the stuff that they yelled wasn't all that memorable, and it maybe wasn't all that meaningful. In the case of Kirby Smart, that's not exactly the case. when Kirby Smart says in the real world, if you don't do your job, you get fired, and then he goes on to add some colorful expletives go along with that. Apparently, this is an idea that has a little deeper meaning for Georgia as a program. You know, he started off by Kirby Smart saying, no, we don't go for the extra motivation. We're not about all the rah-rah stuff necessarily. We don't feel like we need to do that because we're essentially a team that wants to do its job. Kirby during practice, the TikTok video that escapes on the internet saying, if you don't do your job, you blankety blank, get fired. Well, apparently, we're led to believe that that idea, that notion that you show up, you do your job, you're blue collar, you got a lunch pail, all those cliches that go along with that. Apparently, that's pretty deeply embedded into the Georgia program because when it comes to this rivalry game on Saturday, for as much as someone like me who hates the lousy, stinking Gators likes the idea of Georgia being fired up for this game more so than any other game, once again, Jordan Hall, who's just, like I said, I can't even stop talking about how interesting I think he is, went a little bit more deeply into the blue collar, do your job mentality, why that actually takes precedence and supersedes any kind of extra motivation for a rivalry game, even if there is some extra motivation that exists. So listen to Jordan putting some depth to the viral video of Kirby Smart, which I don't even know that Jordan knew about, when Kirby says, you don't do your job, you get fired. Well, Jordan Hall actually made that same point unrelated to the viral video in one of his press conference remarks this week. Take a listen to this.
Not at all. I mean, like I said, it's another game in the book for me. Just trying to get ready for it is, I don't feel like adding personal emotion into it would make a difference. You know what I'm saying? Like, we put up a video in the D-line room every year during fall camp. It's Greg Popovich. And he said if plumbers don't do their job, they don't get no work. He said as players, you don't need a pep talk to go out there and play. It's your job. So this is my job, and I love it. So I go out there and play as hard as possible each and every time I can. So this game it mean a lot to me, but I'll never make it bigger than what it need to be. Just go out there and play.
So I think this is really interesting. I hope that you do too. Obviously, the Greg Popovich he's referencing there, the longtime San Antonio Spurs coach. So what Jordan Hall is saying is, yes, there is some extra motivation. Jordan feels this because he's essentially playing in his hometown. Georgia, he says, feels this because so many players and coaches around Georgia have such deep ties to the state, their own personal memories with the rivalry. Of course, you want to win this game more, and you want to maintain the pride that exists, but the fact that Georgia has dominated this rivalry as of late. Of course, all that's true, and Jordan describes it really well. But then Jordan gives some substance to the viral clip we played to from Kirby Smart a moment ago without even knowing about it or even meaning to. Jordan says, listen, as defensive linemen, we're always told, hearkening back to a Greg Popovich line of, if the plumber doesn't do his job, the plumber doesn't have any clients. And at that point, the plumber's out of business. And Jordan Hall, in so many words, is saying, in this day and age of NIL, in this day and age of unprecedented fame, because you got 10 million people watching these games, Jordan Hall says, I think of myself like a plumber. I think of myself as someone who shows up, who clocks in, who brings his lunch pail and goes to work. And not just any kind of work. The plumber, and listen, plumbers are well paid in our society and they deserve to be. The plumber does sometimes some nasty work, some nasty business in nasty circumstances. But he shows up and he does it. Clients then say, hey, this plumber's great, and therefore he gets well paid and his family's taken care of. Jordan Hall says, I think of myself as a plumber. So when Kirby Smart says, this is why we don't do a ton of rah-rah, in one respect, that's not true because they obviously do some motivation. In the other respect, it's 100% true because Kirby's like, I'm not trying to coach, emotional people who need to constantly be grabbing onto the next new feeling to go out and get their job done. I want some plumbers. I want some plumbers. I want some guys who show up and clock in and get ready to go to work. And in the case of Jordan Hall, that's exactly what they have. And as I said, I think that's pretty interesting. I think that Jordan Hall does a really good job of giving some color to what happens behind the scenes in a way that Kirby Smart just doesn't always necessarily feel comfortable doing. So let's sum this topic up this way. If Jordan Hall is the plumber, and if his fellow defensive linemen and the rest of the Georgia defense, if you want to just keep it to that side of the ball for a moment, if they're ready to clock in and bring their lunch pail and go to work against Florida on Saturday, a team that we do legitimately believe is probably better than the storyline would suggest they are, What does that look like for this game? What is the mentality of this Georgia defense right now? And Jordan Hall gave us a good description. Coming off a bye week, coming off another game where the Georgia defense, at least for the first three quarters, wasn't quite the Georgia defense. What does showing up and doing your job like a plumber look like on Saturday? Here's more from Jordan Hall.
Do simple better. I know that's for our room. And just over the bye week, we did like a little self-scout. Just look and see what you do wrong. Try to get better at that, and really try to just attack the parts of our game that we feel like is weak. I think that's with any team. You go into a bye week, you just want to get better at the things you're not doing right during that time of the season. So we just reflected on ourselves a lot, try to make a lot of different adjustments when it came to that. So that's really all when it comes to the bye week.
So let me sum this up with two small points. Here's point number one. Based on the totality of the season, the Georgia defense does need to play better. That's true. But when you listen to a guy like Jordan Hall and the credibility that he speaks from, if Georgia says we got to do simple better, which is what Jordan just said, we've got to do simple better to be better as a unit, I trust that guy and the guys like Jordan on this defense to find some way to figure it out and how to get it done. It ain't going to be 2021 all over again because it never will be, but can it be better than it's been? I think I trust those guys to figure that out because of how earnest they are in their pursuit of it. I think Jordan's words give a lot of voice to that. And then finally, I'll say this. We joke about Kirby presenting one side of himself in a press conference, a very different side of himself when he's away from the press conference. That's mostly just for fun. But the big picture is I do kind of like both sides of this. I am a very emotional creature. Most humans are. So the notion that this is a rivalry game and you want to dig down deep and you want to reflect on the memories and you want to talk about the history and they did to us back then, so therefore we're going to do this to them now. I can't help but have that really work on me. That stuff is meaningful to me, maybe more meaningful than it should be, but that's just how I am. So the fact that Jordan Hall says, yeah, they told us these stories, and we remember a time in which previous Georgia players didn't have their own history of wins against Florida, and we don't want to go back to that time. Well, of course I like hearing that. But the flip side of that same coin is what Kirby says he likes to hear. Players who act like plumbers, players who act like blue-collar workers who are there to do a job, and they don't need pats on the back, and they don't need love, and they don't need anything else other than this is what a man does. He does his job, therefore we're going to do our job well. I kind of like that side of this coin too. And somehow, some way, Georgia seems to figure out how to have both those things on parallel tracks. You want to feed off the emotion because college football is a really fun thing to be a part of, at least at times, I would imagine. And you want to be dedicated to the hard work because you can't have fun if you're not putting the work in. Somehow, some way, Georgia's found a way to do both of those things. The occasional viral video slipping onto the internet from Kirby Smart gives us an idea of the intensity of practice that makes that possible. And I'd say whatever it takes, just as long as these dogs are ready to go on Saturday, I think we'll all be very happy with the outcome. My name is Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Breda Pest Management. Glad to have you with us, glad to have them as a part of the show too. So if you're tuning in video, whether it's live or on demand, radio, Athens Sports Radio 960 The Rev, podcast, wherever you find them, the world-famous DawgNation.com, Apple, Spotify, everything else, just thrilled to have you as a part of the show. And speaking of showing up and doing hard work for you every day, that's what our friends at Breda Pest Management do too. Because, listen, they take care of me. They come to my house. They keep me bug and critter free. They keep the termites away, which is really important. And I see this. When they show up, it's inside and outside your home. It's coming through the little crevices and the places where you might not think that bugs would want to come in or want to get to, and they make sure that all of that is properly sealed and protected, that the bugs are going to be kept away from all of that. That's what they're all about, and they can do the same thing for you. And here's the deal. When it comes to Breda Pest Management, because of their history, been in business since 1975, they've had great success. Now 125 employees. I see their trucks all over our market area driving, because I'm driving all the time. So I notice, Breda Pest Management vehicles out there on the roads all the time too. So when you make the switch, the company you're working with, let's face it, not the same level of resources, not the same history. They're here today. Are they going to be gone tomorrow? You never know. Certainly could be. And that means that lack of stability for the company that you're working with. They're probably charging you too much money too. They're charging you more money while giving you less service. That's a lose-lose. You don't want that. What you want is to put more money back in your pocket just for making the decision to switch to Brady Pest Management. It's like your own personal NIL deal. You'll have more money for the things you need in life, and you'll have the great care taken of your property that Brady Pest Management's famous for, especially for termites, but also bugs and critters like these flying squirrels and attics and things like that. They are all about all of that. I'm very proud to have them as a part of our program. So find them online. It's bredapest.com, BREDA, bredapest.com. We love to say the DawgNation Daily is brought to you today by our friends at Brady Pest Management. All right, we got Mike Griffith here coming up in a moment. Before we get to Mike, let me also remind you that we are getting very close to a big event. In many respects, it's kind of a first of its kind event for DawgNation, but it's also a throwback to things we've done before. The entire DawgNation team coming together with some special guests, getting a chance to be out and about in the public. And really, a lot of you throughout the years have said, we love it when you guys do events, but can you do one in the Athens area? Well, coming up on November 13th, that's the Thursday before the Georgia game against Texas, that's what we're going to do. We're going to be at Terrapin Beer Company, the wonderful brewery right there in Athens, for an event we're calling DawgNation on Tap. Now, here's how it's going to go. We're going to do an entire Q&A that night with the DawgNation team. You'll have a chance to interact, and we'll have a good time, both formally and informally, talking some Georgia football. As I told you before, we'll also have some special guests, and we'll have some delicious food and beverages. First of all, your first beer that night, courtesy of Terrapin Beer Company, is going to be complimentary, courtesy of them, so that's a lot of fun. And we're going to have some free food that night as well. And who doesn't love free food, courtesy of our friends at Surcheros? That's going to be an incredible experience too. The fresh Mex that Surcheros is famous for, paired with some Terrapin beer, that's an amazing experience. Here's what we're going to do though, because it is a free food event, something we have not quite done before. We're going to ask you to RSVP to attend. Now, it's not a cost. It's not a ticketed event, no cost to attend. But we are going to ask you to RSVP. So simply go to DawgNation.com/on-tap for more on that. It's DawgNation.com/on-tap. And just simply RSVP. Let us know you're coming. We'll have some food for you. We'll make some space for you, and we'll get ready to do that. Oh, yeah, and by the way, one more thing, and this is a big one. For those who are there that night, someone's going to be a winner to a pair of tickets for the big game in Athens that coming up Saturday. That is going to be an amazing giveaway for the folks who are there. Incredible experience on that, so make sure you check that out too. So when you're there, you have a chance to win a pair of tickets to the big game that Saturday in Athens, one of the biggest of the season. Enjoy some great fruit from Surcheros, some delicious Terrapin beer, and some really fun football talk from the DawgNation team and some of our special guests who've been associated with the program throughout the years. All of that coming up. It's DawgNation on Tap at the Terrapin Brewery coming up in Athens on November 13th. Can't wait for that. All right, now let's go around the Dog House, and it's presented today by our friends at Georgia Farm Bureau. I want to circle back to Kirby Smart just for a moment, because we joked off the top of the show that, hey, sometimes Kirby doesn't give you the unfettered access to what he's thinking, what he said. Sometimes Kirby presents in a press conference situation just the safest, most sometimes antiseptic version of himself. But there is a connection that Kirby has to Georgia football that I don't think we should ever lose sight of, and I do think we should always appreciate. That came up this week. One of the reporters was asking Kirby about the fact that you got a lot of guys, Brent Key at Tech, Clark Lee at Vanderbilt, a lot of guys who have highly ranked teams right now also happen to be alumni of those programs. Kirby also being an alumnus of Georgia, he was asked, how much does that status, this being your alma mater, how much does that help you in the job at Georgia? And Kirby gave, I thought, a pretty interesting answer to that. Take a listen to this.
I don't know. I mean, there are advantages in terms of the people the people you're connected to, the infrastructure that you know about, whether it's institutional infrastructure or it's fan base infrastructure. I mean, I think there's an attachment and you understand it well. There's also a burden that comes with that in terms of I've been other places and you never have to worry about keeping people happy that played there before, or the people that were involved there before, or feeling like your time is their time in terms of, I'm not just talking about alumni, I'm talking about, former players in Letterman, I'm talking about alumni and everybody else. So there's advantages and there's disadvantages to it. I don't know if that's correlated to anything or not in terms of it. I would have thought during the NIL fundraising days it probably helped, but it's not, that's not as prevalent right now. It's a little more rev share, and you get your piece of the pie and you spend it how you see fit, whereas before it was how much can you go out and raise. So that might have helped some in the last couple of years.
So what Kirby's describing there is the practical reality of this, more beneficial than not, he says, of Georgia and the important people in the background, things like that. I think that probably allowed him to hit the ground running in a way that someone who was, as a first-time head coach, feeling their way around in all respects, they might not quite have had that. I think that's probably true. You can certainly cite examples of, well, a guy was an alumnus of this school and he had great success, so it seemed to help him. Steve Spurrier of Florida, for instance. But you can also cite other examples where, Nick Saban's in Alabama. He's not a graduate of the University of Alabama, but yet he had great success there. So there are going to be examples and counterexamples for all of this when it comes to the practical reality. The one thing that I would say, though, is, and the reason why I play that clip is because deeper than how much it's helped Kirby, I think there's also this thought of, well, how much has it impacted us? And I think you would join me in saying that whether it's helped Kirby a lot or not, it's at least helped a little. I do think it has been more fun, hasn't it? That ultimately Georgia fans, if you want to go back to when Kirby was first hired, they just wanted to have a winner. And they would have taken anything that would have helped them get the kinds of wins they wanted to have in all likelihood. But to have the guy who is the alumnus, to have the guy who is the graduate, who knows the history, who was a part of the history, even if he doesn't always play along with the retelling of that history, it has been more fun for us. I'll give you a quick example that we'll bring on Mike Griffith. I'm not going to play these clips just because we don't have time to, but you should go to our DawgNation YouTube page and you should hear the press conference that Drew Bobo did this week. And Drew told the story of a couple of things. His childhood memory of staying with his grandparents to watch the Georgia win against Florida in 2012, and he obviously remembered that. He was a very young kid at the time, which is scary to think that Georgia players who are playing now were very young in 2012. That's horrifying, but nonetheless, that is the truth. He had memories of that game. He told the story of dressing up like Aaron Murray for Halloween, and for those of us who Georgia's always been my home state. The Georgia Bulldogs have always been my favorite team. I am going nowhere. You'll never see me dressed in, Ole Miss gear one day doing this somewhere else, because this is where I was born. This is where I'm going to die. This is where I'm going to always be. I am a Georgian through and through, and very proud of that fact. Well, in this era, it also happens to be that those who are a part of Georgia, the head coach, some of his top assistants, those top assistants, players, sons, multi-generational devotion to Georgia. Does it help them win games? Well, it probably doesn't hurt. Does it make the wins more fun? It absolutely does. And as we joked about off the top of the show, Kirby's not going to always say out loud how true that is. But if you pay close attention, you'll notice. And when you notice it, it should make it even more enjoyable for you. This is a special era for Georgia football because Georgia has never been more Georgia than it is right now. And that is Around the Doghouse, presented today, speaking of Georgia, by our friends at Georgia Farm Bureau. Now, for us, we know who the home team is, but Georgia Farm Bureau can always be your home team. In fact, they are. For the things perhaps you need in life that you don't love to think about, insurance, auto insurance, home insurance, life insurance, these are things that can lead to, I don't know, sort of unpleasant memories, maybe confusion. We joked last week about people not really knowing how insurance works. But that's why the Georgia Farm Bureau people are so into being friendly and letting you know that they are just like you, Georgians in communities just like yours, raising their family and going to work and taking care of business. And when you reach out to them, you're going to have a great experience as a part of that conversation. In fact, you can give them a call right now, 877-404-1050. That's 877-404-1050. You can also find them online, gfbinsurance.com. Talk to one of the agents, if need be, one of the claims adjusters, and you're going to find a friendly voice on the other side of that call. That's why Georgia Farm Bureau is always the home team. We love having them as a part of Around the Doghouse. We love having our guy Mike Griffith here as well. So before we get Davin Bellamy later on, and by the way, one of the things we'll talk to about to Davin is how much he has memories of that time in which Georgia was not having great success against Florida, and how that has all changed since then. We'll do some of that with Davin later on. But for now, it's Mike Griffith today here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Breda Pest Management. Glad to have you with us.
From Athens and across the SEC or wherever the recruiting trail may lead, here's a DawgNation.com insider.
Let's bring in Mike Griffith here. Georgia getting ready for Florida on Saturday. And Mike, I know throughout the years, you and I have been on different sides of what the cocktail party means, what it's all about. I think you've also, and don't let me put words in your mouth, but I think you've also evolved to the point of, well, they're going to pay you this much money going forward in the future. You're going to be playing the game there no matter what. I think you would say, I know you said that not too long ago on the show, but as people who come at this from different vantage points, at least historically, are you as struck by as I am by the fact that in a lot of ways, this is the end of an era for the cocktail party? I've brought this up with every guest this week, that Georgia's going to go away from Jacksonville for 2 years, do 2 different neutral site venues, and when it comes back, it's a completely different stadium. Now, in some respects, it's going to be a better stadium because it'll be newer and I guess nicer. Clearly, the Jacksonville stadium's not very nice right now, probably the worst in the NFL, you'd almost have to imagine, at least among the worst. But the things that we've loved about the cocktail party, the sunset over the St. Johns River, the Hart Bridge, all the visual images that you get. And I grew up, looking at these images, even when I watched Georgia lose on the field, all of the things that have made the game feel the way that it is. When we go back here 2 years from now, it's going to be a completely different feeling experience. How much have you thought about that?
Oh, there's no question. When I look at that stadium of the future, it's incredible. It's beautiful. It's a new beginning. It's a fresh beginning. It's a needed beginning. Just to be clear, coming into the Georgia BA and not having grown up with it like yourself and many of the Georgia fans, I came in listening to the book of Kirby. And the book of Kirby was, does this help us win a championship? And Kirby Smart was against this game being in a neutral site for quite some time, because there was a time when those recruiting weekends held such great value. And he looked at that as a missed opportunity. And he's here trying to win titles. And when you and I would go back and forth with some of our ridiculous arguments, I remember you saying, well, if Kirby Smart wins a national title, he can do whatever he wants. And then he won 2, and you go, well, that just proves that he can play the game there. So the people who love it really, truly love it and have passionate feelings about it, and I respect that. I just came in on the other side of, man, this Georgia team has been a sleeping dynamo, 41 years between titles. This is one more thing that they coulda, shoulda. I talked to Pat Dye about it before he passed away. He told me he didn't think much of it either, even though he's in the Hall of Fame. He would have preferred a home and home as well. And I'm going, wow, Pat Dye's telling me that. Kirby Smart's telling me that. I'm coming in with my eyes looking at this dilapidated stadium. I don't have the memories that a lot of Georgia fans do. So in full transparency, I did not have the right appreciation for it to share an opinion of a lifelong Georgia fan. I came in as a guy saying, hey, Kirby's trying to win titles. Why isn't everybody signed up? Well, now the model has changed. Those recruiting weekends, hey, the check's going to cash whether they're here on campus or not. Don't get me wrong. I love the Athens eateries, but that restaurant meal and those parents coming into town to walk through the columns, that's not going to make a difference. It's going to come down to hard, cold cash. And this new stadium is going to give a tremendous opportunity for the fans. They're not giving up anything. I believe this is going to be state of the art. I believe the game environment's going to be much improved. And you see that stadium, it's just unbelievable, isn't it? It's going to be better than SoFi even, right? So this is a great future. And to your point, I'm really excited about the future here. And I'm ready. I just hope Georgia gets this win, because this game, Brandon, this game's shaking up to be a tough one, I believe.
Well, we'll talk about that part of it. I will add one more thing on this particular topic before we get there. And I would say that this is among the more divisive issues for Georgia fans. It's something close to 50-50. I can't quite decide which side has maybe a majority, but it's pretty close to 50-50 on this. But as this debate has raged over the years, I think one thing, and I'm talking about where the game should be played, I think one thing we never would have considered back then that's turned out to be true, with the SEC moving to the 9-game conference schedule, by playing this game in Jacksonville, it certainly appears, at least for the next 4 years, and if not in perpetuity, Georgia's going to avoid something that anybody would want to avoid, which is having those years when you have to play 5 conference road games. as of now, because of the 4-4-1 neutral site split, Georgia's not going to play that fifth conference road game every other year. Neither will Florida, neither will Texas, neither will Oklahoma. And I don't know if this means in the future every SEC team is going to want a neutral site game or what, but and I hope the SEC doesn't quite figure this out. Yeah. But it's a pretty big advantage to Georgia if we assume this goes on forward, and the other teams who will also get it, not to have that year with 5 conference road games.
Yeah, I agree. I believe Oklahoma, Texas will be in that situation as well. So, yeah, I was going to say, don't say that too loudly. We don't want anybody to think that Georgia's catching a break with the schedule, because we certainly haven't seen that.
Well, as long as Texas is getting the same thing, then maybe Georgia can, because we know that Texas will get the fringe benefits. We don't always trust the league to give that to Georgia, but as long as Texas is arguing for it on their benefit, then maybe Georgia can just sort of ride their coattails.
Yeah, there you go. And then Georgia Tech punts a game to Georgia's home away from home to Mercedes-Benz Stadium. I'm signed up for that as well. I'm sure Georgia fans are as well. And a nice indoor, toasty, warm stadium that they can dominate when they play the Jackets. So yeah, I mean, it looks like things are finally breaking right. This year's schedule, though, it's not over yet. And we know that this bye week has come at a good time for Florida with an interim head coach, a lot of recharged batteries in Gainesville, I'm hearing. We know Texas has a bye before they come into Athens, which seems like a ridiculous advantage for them to have at this stage of the season. And, of course, we mentioned Georgia Tech as well late in the year moving their game. So I think there's still some hurdles left for this Georgia team between now and the playoff. I haven't quite decided yet if I think this year's team is better than last year's team, because last year's team showed resiliency and played in the SEC title game, and we still don't know how this script's going to play out. Georgia's going to need a little bit of help to get into the SEC championship game for what would be the 8th time in the last 9 years, which is just amazing.
So let's talk about the game in particular. And listen, one of the things that Georgia's held its, kind of hung its hat on, so to speak, is before the year began, they said, we want to run the ball better, we want to stop the run better. They've succeeded in both of those categories here this season. But I do think one of the things that makes the Florida game tough before you even get to whatever new wrinkles they may have for DJ Lagway is Florida's got a pretty good rushing attack, and they've got a pretty good front seven. And when Georgia last saw what I think of as a good front seven against Auburn, they didn't really run the ball very well that day. And I do think for what Georgia has consistently done well this year, at least better than it did a year ago, running the ball, stopping the run, I think that Florida presents a challenge in both those respects. This is one of those things where I think our audience is pretty plugged into this, that the storyline, Florida played badly enough that it fired its coach, does not suggest the reality of this game. It's a slightly above a touchdown point spread. It's another one of these games, like about half the games in the SEC have been this season, single digits or closer for the final margin. I expect this to be another tough 4-quarter football game where Georgia fans are biting their fingernails, butterflies in the stomach. I don't think that Florida is going to make it easy on Georgia, in other words. I think that Georgia's got to go take it from them in Jacksonville on Saturday.
Yeah, one of the most amazing stats, and take it for good or bad, B8, Kirby and Georgia have only led one time in the last 11 games against Power 4 teams. That goes all the way back at halftime. And that goes all the way back to last year's Texas game. This is a team, like Kirby said, yeah, we're a fourth-quarter team. We got to be. We're behind. They've been behind in the fourth quarter, 3 of their 4 wins this year. So this has been a team that's had to do it that way. And I know Kirby doesn't necessarily write it up that way. It's just the way it's worked out. It says a lot for the resiliency of the conditioning, the substitutions, but it doesn't say much for the scripting at the beginning of the game. And I believe that's what needs to change if Georgia is going to make a run in the college football playoffs, regardless of this game. This game in particular, though, remember, Florida led this game at halftime, and DJ Lagway was up 7-3 when he left the game with a hamstring injury. Now he's had an extra week of rest. He's going to be better. He's going to be more accurate. He showed more mobility in the last game. They have won 2 of their last 3 games. They did beat Texas more decisively than the number 1 team in the nation, Ohio State did. So this is a team that's got teeth. This is a team that's got momentum, and they feel like their play calling is going to be streamlined enough that they can play faster. Some people felt Billy Napier was a bit cumbersome getting involved in the play calling. They feel better now that they have Ryan O'Hara and Russ Callaway up in the box making these calls without any Billy Napier interference.
Yeah, so I'll squeeze this in to let you go, and I've mentioned this week already too, which is, as I said, I'm expecting a close game for a lot of the reasons you just mentioned, some of the reasons that I mentioned. Let's say that Georgia wins by 2 touchdowns. Let's say that Georgia does lead at halftime. Let's say that Georgia, and insert your own joke here, let's say they play at a similar standard for all 4 quarters. That to me would be a pretty big statement because everybody's excited because of what happened against Ole Miss, and I think they should be. It's one of the thrilling wins that I've seen Georgia get. But how meaningful it was, I think, depends on the kind of compound interest that Georgia gets from it. And for a Florida team that I think that timed the Napier firing to sneak up on Georgia and's got, got a lot of emphasis on this football game. If Georgia can play well, if Georgia can win with some comfort, with some margin, Mike, that'd be a pretty big statement for me that maybe this is a Georgia team that's in the midst of turning a corner.
Yeah, no question about it. And you got to give kudos to Kirby Smart. I mean, watching that G-Day game and reflecting on the Notre Dame game and even the second half of SEC game, if you'd have told me that Gunnar Stockton would legitimately be number 6 in the Heisman Trophy rankings right now, I couldn't have imagined the scenario, but the kid has just made some incredibly timely plays. Yeah, his stats may be mediocre overall, but when the time has come for him to deliver, he has stepped up. And it's really been amazing to watch, and it says so much about Kirby Smart's ability to identify these traits in players, whether it's Gunnar Stockton, whether it's Stetson Bennett, whether it's Ladd McConkey. I mean, yeah, he gets the 5 stars. He's able to recruit those guys, but Kirby's knack for identifying talent. London Humphreys, a guy when he brought in here, what is he doing? Bringing in a Vanderbilt guy. Oh, yeah, a Vanderbilt guy who just happened to make the biggest catch of the season, if you ask me, which was an incredible throw and catch. On 4th and 6 from the Tennessee 28 oil painting moment. So I take stock in Kirby. That said, this rivalry's been tough, and I believe this win streak is the longest that they've had in the series for, I don't know, some 40 years.
Yeah, since early 80s.
They typically don't win this. I mean, hey, Dan Mullen was a pretty good coach in 2020. They coached him up, and we don't really know what Billy Gonzalez and Ryan O'Hara and Russ Callaway are going to dial. We don't really know what kind of day DJ Lagway in an underdog role with CBS Sports there in the afternoon, as you said, in this prime setting, the final game at Everbank Stadium between these two rivals before this, awkward Atlanta, Tampa home and home deal, another money deal made instead of a home and home. There's a lot of buzz around it. There's a lot of factors. I know we're going to do a lot on Go with the Flow later this week, but I'm excited. I'm as excited about this Georgia-Florida game as I've been in some time in terms of what we're going to see. I think we're going to see a real battle.
Mike, good stuff. As I said, we'll see you this week on, as you said, we'll see you this week on Go with the Flow, presented by R.S. Andrews, official pick on the game coming there. Of course, I will talk to you in Jacksonville here, too. Thanks for your time, as always. We'll look forward to talking to you soon here on DawgNation Daily.
Yeah, I want to see who Davin Bellamy says has to be Batman and Robin in this game. His takes are always exciting. I look forward to that.
Yeah, we'll certainly get to that. Good stuff, Mike. Thanks for your time.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
As Mike said, we'll get Davin Bellamy here coming up in a little bit. A lot to talk to Davin about here, and just laying out this Georgia-Florida game that you get little butterflies. It's an interesting, I told you before, I'm kind of an emotional creature. You get, on the one hand, you get the butterflies in the stomach, and that is an ample stomach to have butterflies in. You got the butterflies in the stomach, but you also got that little bit of optimism that wants to creep in, because last time we saw Georgia, they were doing some pretty special things, heroic in the 4th quarter of an otherwise nail-biting game. We just don't know, and that's one of the things that makes college football so fun, and we're obviously going to keep trying to figure it out as we get ready for Saturday. Before we do our SEC Through, let's talk about another Georgia rivalry game here for a moment. As Mike Griffith said, we think Black Friday afternoon is a real opportunity for Georgia, because it was supposed to be a Georgia Tech home game. They saw the chance to move it to Mercedes-Benz Stadium. Their decision can be our reward, because if you're a Georgia fan, we know, listen, some of these games in Athens, you got these massive ticket prices, hard to get in, and yet for you this year, it could be the most accessible ticket to a big game. Maybe this one in Mercedes-Benz Stadium on the day after Thanksgiving against Georgia Tech. And to Tech's credit, this is as close as we'll come to giving them credit, but to Tech's credit, they have made this a big game this year by they're undefeated. They're ranked in the top 10. They have playoff aspirations. And boy, is there some big talk. What do they call it? The flats? Is that what they call it? There is some big talk coming from the flats. Oh my, what a special year they think they're in the midst of having. It'd be just a dadgum shame if Georgia went into Mercedes-Benz Stadium and completely ruined that story. I say sarcastically. But in order for that to happen, we got to have Georgia fans in the building. Got to have you there. So here's the website, mercedes-benzstadium.com/events. Get your tickets, be a part of it. We want you there. We want to make this a Georgia home game. The stadium's already red and black, but we want it painted red and black with a bunch of Georgia fans just making all kinds of noise for the defense and just celebrating every Georgia score, which we hope comes in bunches. This is a rivalry like all of them that Georgia's dominated. We want to make sure that domination continues here at Mercedes-Benz Stadium. You got to get your tickets, mercedesbenzstadium.com/events for more on that. Okay. Before we get Davin Bellamy, let's do an SEC through here for a moment. I can't remember if I said this on the show or if I just said this. Maybe I said this on the show. That I think that we have a little bit of a theme emerging for this weekend in the SEC. It's kind of an elimination Saturday, isn't it? So let's keep a good thought and be, what do they say, in anticipation. Let's be in anticipation of a Georgia win against Florida. Well, look at what the SEC landscape might look like around Georgia when that happens. We've already seen would-be playoff contenders eliminated. LSU, for instance, they've been voted off the island. They just lost again this past Saturday. Brian Kelly got fired. You may have seen something about that. So you've got a school like LSU that's already been eliminated, and there is the potential for others to be eliminated too. Think about all of the different things that are going to go down, things that you could see here. First of all, you've got a matchup where Vanderbilt goes to Texas. Now, Vanderbilt comes into this game with a lot more steam than Texas does. We never could have foreseen that before the season started, but that's what's turned out to be true. This is, though, Texas playing as a small favorite in its own stadium. This is a game that experts think they're going to win. But if they don't, the preseason number one team, for all intents and purposes, you can't say for sure, you can't say guaranteed, but boy, you would feel like, in all likelihood, Texas, before we basically even get to November, or I guess the first day of November, would be eliminated from the college football playoff race. That's fascinating to have Texas eliminated before it even plays Georgia. We think with 3 losses, that's about where they would be. How about a battle going down, elsewhere, where you got Oklahoma playing against Tennessee? I think the least talked about team in the SEC right now might be Tennessee. Tennessee gave Georgia everything it wanted. It was probably more competitive with Alabama than the final score suggested. Those were its 2 losses. Against Oklahoma at home, they get to show how true that is. An Oklahoma team that's also lost now for its second time. We would assume the loser of that Tennessee-Oklahoma game is also eliminated from the playoff. So we've been saying this for Georgia for a while. If you'll just keep winning, if you'll avoid the chaos, almost like a NASCAR driver driving through the wreckage, if you can just do that, some of these teams are going to eliminate themselves, and you look around, you realize, oh, where'd my competition go? It's a lot thinner than it once was. And thus far, that's what Georgia's doing. So keep your eye on this. If Georgia takes care of its business, at least 1, if not 2, maybe more, other SEC playoff contenders could move closer to the brink of elimination based on the results of this weekend. Honestly, at one point in time, this was thought to be like one of the biggest weeks of the year. A lot of the results leading into this have diminished the value of some of these games. For instance, Penn State, Ohio State's nowhere near what it was supposed to be, but it's still pretty interesting in the SEC because these days, that's all the SEC seems to provide. So keep that in mind. For now, we'll make that our SEC through. And here on DawgNation Daily, we'll also get ready to have some fun here as we bring on the great former Georgia linebacker Davin Bellamy. Always keen insight from him. Just getting ready for a big one against Florida on Saturday. Davin, first of all, thanks for your time. Appreciate you being here. Glad to have you as a part of the show.
Brandon, likewise, man. Always good to be here, baby.
So let me begin with this. We had Jordan Hall, Georgia defensive lineman, earlier in the show say that they played a clip to them of an old team meeting where the Georgia players who had ever beaten Florida, the Georgia coaches who had ever been a part of a win against Florida, were asked to stand up. I'm assuming this was leading into the 2017 game, and in that particular room that day, very few were able to stand up. My guess is that you were in that meeting. Is that true? Do you remember that moment?
Man, you know what? I don't remember that moment. I have so many, team meetings that, they all kind of just blend together. But I do remember being part of just this up and down battle with Florida of them beating the hell out of us. I think my freshman year or red shirt, freshman year. And then, watching Smart, come over and that tide just changed, man. So I think I was like 2-2, against Florida. So, I had to be in there. These guys now, they don't know what that feels like, which is probably a good thing, because, in their brain, they're expected, to win because they know the importance, of this game. So just the confidence that's leading into this game, is perfect for those guys.
Somebody sent me this morning. I hadn't thought about this. I guess it's also the 10-year anniversary of the Fatone Bauta game. Fatone starting at quarterback. Listen, I'm sure Fatone's the best guy in the world. I don't mean to disparage him at all. It was certainly a weird moment in the history of this rivalry. Do you remember that? And if so, what do you remember about it?
Nah, I do, man. And, I love him. I love Patone, but I mean, we were going into that game not with the quarterbacks that we're coming in with the last, couple of years. So
To say the least.
yeah, for sure. So at some points with those early teams that I was a part of against Florida, it was like watching, paint dry on the offensive side of the ball. We just couldn't get, anything going. And I think one of the years they put up 40 on us. Um, so yeah, that's what I can remember about, Fatone of, I love him madly. Always have nothing positive to say about guys I've played with, but we was a little short-handed on the offensive side of the end. I think, that was that year too, where man, we just kind of was filtering, quarterbacks. We just couldn't
Mhm.
find one that could just get a groove. And, Fatone was kind of showing us that moxie, at practice of, maybe if he get in the game, he's just a gamer. And he was a guy that just worked super hard. You always saw him stand after practice, get in there before practice. And we always said, will hard work pay off for this guy? And then when he, got his shot, sometimes hard work doesn't, pay off. So, but I think we're in a good quarterback position spot right now.
Well, in fairness, let me just say this and we'll move on. In fairness, obviously that seems like an unorthodox decision, but in fairness, it's not that much crazier than thinking the scout team quarterback from 2017 would go on to win 2 national championships, which did happen. So, unfortunately, for the 2015 game, Fatone Bauta didn't quite catch lightning in a bottle, but like a couple of years later, arguably something even crazier than that happened when Stetson Bennett went from just an afterthought to being, one of the great quarterbacks in program history.
Yeah, man, that's the crazy thing about, football, and the football gods, man, is, you kind of don't know who they're going to touch when they get the opportunity. And, with certain guys, it's same way with Stetson, the guy you're talking about, guy worked hard. We saw what he was doing to us. Stetson probably wasn't working before and post practice like Fatone was. But I tell you what, man, when Coach Smart told him to put on that scout team jersey and make those guys look crazy, he was able to do that. And then, when he got his shot, he just balled. But that kind of leads into this week when you kind of, think about it, when you're playing a team that doesn't have any,
Yeah.
tendencies because their head coach left who was, calling the plays, and now they have a younger guy that's going to be, calling the plays. Will you see more of that new style, offense with them? Was Billy the one holding,
Yeah.
DJ back? So much in the preparation goes into, tendencies, what this player likes to do first down, who they like to go to on third down, what their defense like to run. Well, when you take all that out through the week for preparation, it kind of makes it tough for the defense to pick up some of the tendencies. So let's hope with them changing head coaches and play calling duties that they don't find that, lightning in the bottle like Fatone didn't.
Okay, so let me ask you about that because the assumption I've made is this, is that and for whatever reason, we've seen this now going back a few years, like Cadillac as the interim coach at Auburn a couple of years ago, and, Jerry Neuheisel, UCLA. You can cite lots of examples where the interim coach comes in, all of a sudden everybody's just more relaxed. They're
Right.
having fun. If you'll notice, the guy that gets chosen to be the interim is almost always a popular assistant. In other words, the hard-nosed guy that everybody hates, that guy's not the interim coach. The interim coach is always the guy that's sort of the good cop. That's the guy that always gets to be the interim coach. And to my eyes, players seem to like to play for that kind of guy. So from that standpoint, Billy Gonzalez feels like that for Florida. He's been around the program forever. So there's a little bit more of a relaxed energy. But as far as the football part that I'm not going to notice as much as you are, do you think that Florida on 2 weeks' notice is going to be able to create some looks offensively that Georgia has not seen and that Georgia will not know is coming?
You know what, Brandon? I definitely think so. Well, you got to look at, Billy Napier. First, you bring up the age and kind of the coaching tree he's came from. He's going to be more methodic on the offensive side of the ball. He's not going to be really with the new gadget things. And when you start to go to the young, fiery, uh, coordinator that kind of grew up in these times, you start to see more of the motion in the offense, more of an explosive, offense. So it's definitely going to be different from what Georgia is used to seeing. And then Billy Napier wasn't really, helping DJ Lagway. So whatever offense that they was running was causing this QB to throw multiple picks and just not be able to take advantage of his arm like he did last year. So they're not going to keep bumping their head against that wall. This new, OC is going to try to, figure out a way to first make sure DJ Lagway doesn't hit the transfer portal. So show that there is some type of positivity with this, program. So in my opinion, in order to keep their quarterback and also keep the confidence, of this team, they have to bring in a new style of offense because the way of the old just wasn't going good. And then you had a coach that was, coaching, out of stress. And what I always say is your team develops the, personality of the OC, the head coach, the DC. So when a coach is coaching and he's, play calling not to lose his job, he's play calling with stress, that trickles down, on the staff. So I definitely think that Florida is going to have a different wrinkle with their, offense just to get this team going.
Let me finish with this. I've seen some of the stuff you've been putting on social media, very complimentary of Gunnar Stockton, the Georgia offense, going back to the last game against Ole Miss. And, of course, the results that day were eye-popping. Boy, it'd be nice to keep some of that going against Florida. Now, the challenge is Gator's a much better defense than Ole Miss has, so that it's a much tougher job for Georgia overall. But, and you can take this however you want to go with it, what would you like to see from the Georgia offense against Florida on Saturday?
The best thing I love about Gunnar and this offense is they're not doing anything special. They're winning first down, either if it's bullying you and getting 3 yards on first down. All their third downs are majority 3rd and 5, 3rd and 6. Gunnar now 7 games in, 2.5 seasons worth of reps is showing a quarterback that last year we saw, okay, if the first read wasn't open, let me get out of here. Not really scanning the field. I think when you start to look at the tape, he's not doing anything special. He's taking what the defense gives him. And I remember sitting in a team meeting with Mark Richt, and I think it was Aaron Murray was about 2 games or a game away from being the all-time leader in pass yards in the SEC. And I remember Mark Richt in a team meeting said he remembered coaching Chris Winkie, who won the Heisman. And he told him that if you just take the checkdowns, you'll win the Heisman. Well, he said that same message to Aaron Murray about you just take what the defense give you, you'll have this record. And I think Gunnar just does a great job of that. So they don't do anything special. You know what I'm saying? So I just want to see Georgia football be Georgia football, who they've shown that they could be out of the last, 2 weeks. A team that's going to out-physical you up front, bully, front 7, quarterback, take what the defense give you. If it's not there, use your legs, no negative plays. we're talking about a quarterback who's only threw one pick.
Yeah.
So this is a guy who's playing at a very efficient level. I'm not looking at how many yards per game he's thrown for or his QBR. I'm watching a guy have an offense ran like a well-oiled, machine. So coming into this game, and I don't think Gunner's a guy that looks at the stats or checks the social media. He don't care that he's, in the Heisman talks. He's going to continue to go out there and do what Georgia football is bred to do, and that's be physical and take what the defense give you. So as long as Georgia does that, in my opinion, they're the best team. They're the best, coach team. If we don't give them any momentum, then we'll come out and win.
I love it, Davin. That's well said. That's awesome. Thanks for sharing the insight with us in the show here today. And as I mentioned, you're out there doing great stuff on social media all the time, breaking this stuff down. You're a team meeting videos. If people want to find more of that, how can they connect with you online?
I really appreciate that, man. You can check my Twitter, Davin Bellamy 17. I post the clips there. YouTube channel, One Love Media, and also my Instagram, Team 7 Meeting, and Davin Bellamy 17. Man, I really appreciate it.
Davin, enjoy the games this weekend. We'll look forward to talking to you next week.
Always, baby. Go Dogs.
Go Dogs, indeed. Great stuff there from Davin Bellamy. And before we get ready to wrap things up here today, one of the things you'll notice about me is I'm a pretty sentimental person, right? So when we talk about Georgia, Florida, we're talking about memories made throughout the years and making new memories. I just think about that sort of thing. When I think about Georgia football, I think about my family, the family of origin that taught me to love Georgia football and the experience that I have with my family around this right now. That's always the most important topic for me in any subject we might be discussing. A lot of deep family connections for me as it relates to Georgia football. But that's also true for something like, say, Daytona Beach, which we talk about a lot on this show too. I grew up going to Daytona Beach, and I mean literally every single summer. We'd pack up the car, we'd drive, stop at the Florida Welcome Center, get some of that orange juice that they'll give you, and we'll keep on driving. And when you're a kid, obviously you just couldn't wait to get there. You're so excited about that. And I love the fact that here on this show, we get a chance to talk about Daytona Beach on a regular basis, because when I talk about Daytona Beach, I think about all the memories that I made there growing up and the memories that are still being made there right now. Because here's the thing. It's a wonderful time to get away to Daytona Beach. In fact, if you'll check out the website, DaytonaBeach.com/hotel deals, you'll find out all about this. First of all, it's easy to get there. You don't have to do like my family did. We packed into the big sedan, whatever it was we had, and rolled down the road, probably no air conditioning. You don't have to do that. You can fly there. There's an international airport in Daytona. You can fly right from Atlanta, which is always a really great experience. And plus, with 23 miles of shoreline, that means lots of hotels and resorts, lots of opportunities for you to get maybe better savings than you realize. And you can go see some of the landmarks that I saw growing up, like the Ponce Inlet Lighthouse, like the Main Street Pier, like some of the great restaurants that are still just as great as ever, and frankly, new cuisines and new dining experiences coming on every single day. Plus, if you like to parasail, if you like to fish, if you like to golf, obviously you love motorsports, but it's way more than just that. It's a great experience, and we think this fall you ought to try it for yourself. So check out DaytonaBeach.com/hotel deals for more on that. DaytonaBeach.com/hotel deals for more on that today. And speaking of great memories, we'll harken back to one of those for our golden shoe here today. Throwing it back 8 years ago to the world's largest outdoor cocktail party and a big event we had the night before the game, hanging out with some Georgia fans. Rob McNew wrote in to say, 8 years ago today, I was with DawgNation Daily, that's me, Jeff Sintel. We were at a bar in Jacksonville the night before the world's largest outdoor cocktail party. Now, first of all, I love this picture because you see Gator hater shirts all over the place. You got me, and you got the three folks that are next to us. You even got Gator hater shirts in the background. We had a big event in Florida the night before that game. I appreciate Rob sharing that. That's an awesome memory to go back and relive. But how about this? And I hate to admit this, but it's true. Look how much younger I looked 8 years ago. Oh my gosh. I guess we're all the same way on that. Barely a gray hair. Just, living life. I'm telling you right now, 8 years is a long time in the life of someone who talks about Georgia football every day, apparently. But you want to talk about one of our great memories? This would have been the night before Georgia won in 2017, which, because that's when the Gatorade shirts first started coming out, leading into that 2017 game, leading into this run of what, Georgia winning everyone but the pandemic, which we know doesn't count. Since then, it's been quite a run for Georgia. We credit the Gator t-shirts for why that happened. I appreciate Rob sharing that, throwing it back to 8 years ago when we did all of this. So I guess it's 7 of 8 that Georgia's won since then. Incredible stuff. Golden shoes all the way around. And boy, I still love the original Gator hater. That's a fun thing to be able to see. Speaking of it, how about those lousy, stinking Gators? It's been 1,817 days since Florida's beaten Georgia. We hope after Saturday that number keeps on going, because after that, we're making a pretty big march towards some really pretty numbers. But you got to take care of business on Saturday for that to be true. So y'all have a great day. We're back tomorrow, DawgNation Daily, presented by Breda Pest Management. We'll look forward to talking to you then. And on video, time now for the R.S. Andrews Cool Down. R.S. Andrews, the one you turn to for your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, and electric needs. We talked earlier about Jordan Hall wanting to be a plumber or acting like a plumber. Our friends at R.S. Andrews, they got plumbers who do that same work, the kind of hard-nosed, blue-collar work that a good plumber's famous for. Our folks at R.S. Andrews can do that for you too. So we'll get some comments, and we hope you're doing well. And speaking of R.S. Andrews, we'll say Go With The Flow, presented by R.S. Andrews, return again today. That should be a lot of fun. All right. Comments here on YouTube to begin. Bill Shirley giving you a Go Dog Sick'em. Woof, woof, woof. We like that. Jonathan Aaron says, when are we going to start our show before the show? Jonathan, I don't know. Because the one thing the doctors were very clear to me about was, because I'm still dealing with some pretty significant voice issues, I don't know that you notice it in studio quite as much, but boy, if I'm out of studio, you can really tell. Because I think in studio, I hear my voice in my ears, and so therefore I just have learned to project a little bit better into the microphone. But in a normal situation, man, you hear that raspy hoarseness. It's still there. It's not going to probably go away anytime soon. And so, like, the one thing they told me is you're fine to work, no big deal on that, but you need to take it easy when you can. So we had gotten from the pre-show to the post-show, we were doing darn near 2 hours every single day. And that's just kind of a lot. So I'm going to have to beg your pardon on this and say that on this particular issue, while I love doing it for the people, while I enjoy doing that, I probably got to pull back a little bit on that. Is it Junior Meow who says about Colby Young? Yeah, so Colby, in all likelihood, done for this season. Serious enough injury that he's essentially acknowledged that, and he had to apply for special status to play this year, so his eligibility is also done as well. Bill Shirley says I'm in his prayers, and I certainly appreciate that, Bill. I believe in prayer very, very sincerely, and I am always open to receiving them. Thank you very much. Angela Smith says she's going to be watching the game on mute on Saturday because she doesn't want to hear Jesse Palmer talking bad about the Dogs. And Angela, I understand where you're coming from there on that. Sounds like Zachary Cannon agrees with that too. Bill Shirley says he read where Urban Meyer is helping Florida get ready for the Georgia-Florida game. Well, given how Urban coached in that stadium for the Jacksonville Jaguars, we may want Urban Meyer helping, if that's the case. Wyatt Fielden says, enjoy Jacksonville this weekend. Hope you have fun. Yeah, I think, one of the things I like seeing about the old pictures is back when we were going and, we were making the full weekend out of it, really getting into the cocktail party, if you get my drift. It is not like that for me anymore. I'm in a very different stage of life than that. We do high school football on Fridays. That means I won't be leaving to go to Jacksonville until early Saturday morning. You get there in time for the game. And then after the game, my son's got baseball on Sunday. So I'm rushing in, do the game, do the post-game show, and essentially rushing back home. So I don't know. One of these days, I have this vision of life slowing down just a little bit. And I don't wish my way into that because you don't want to wish anything away. These are all special, moments. But boy, I tell you what, looking back on a time when the Georgia-Florida game meant getting there on Friday afternoon and going to dinner and hanging out and waking up and doing a big tailgate and then, hopefully coming back to celebrate a victory. And I don't know, maybe you wake up on Sunday and you play a little golf or you have a nice breakfast and you walk on the beach for a minute. Boy, that is not quite the and listen, I got the greatest life in the world, so no one should feel sorry for me. But that is not quite the stage of life I am in right now. Not quite that stage of life. Beer Cans and Batty says, if I'm LSU, I give Urban Meyer a blank check. Yeah, I don't think that Urban Meyer's star shines quite as brightly as it once did because the Jacksonville Jaguars episode was embarrassing for him. And I do think, fairly or not, it's caused a little bit of a reconsidering of his time in Florida and his time at Ohio State, 2 places where he won national championships. And at one point in time, people forget this. If you want to go back probably circa 2013, 2014, when we talked about best coach in college football, we said Nick Saban, Urban Meyer side by side. That Saban didn't pull out in front and leave everybody else in his wake until around the time of probably 2015, 2017. But even in that, you're still losing some to Dabo Swinney a little bit. This idea that there's never been a coach as good as Nick Saban. During the time that Saban was doing the winning that made him be considered the greatest coach of all time, that is not quite what the media narrative was. At one point in time, Urban Meyer was definitely thought to be his equal, his contemporary. Eventually that changed because, like I said, the Meyer reputation just got diminished at a certain point. But go back just for fun and think about what was said about Nick Saban after Kevin Sumlin beat him in 2012, after Gus Malzahn beat him in 2013. Hugh Freeze beat him 2014, 2015. There was this thought, now it was obviously incorrect, but boy, it was a loud message, that all of these spread-oriented, newer style SEC coaches, they were coming in here, Nick Saban in his old ways, set in his ways. He was not prepared for the innovative coaches that were taking over the SEC West, even some of that for Dan Mullen. There was definitely a lot of that talk back then. It's just funny to think about how now people act like, boy, there's never been a coach anywhere near as good as Nick Saban. But while Nick Saban was in the midst of this career, that's not really what people were saying. Beer Cans and Batty says that Saban failed with the Dolphins. Now, I would say that's not exactly true. Saban was 8-8 2 years there. That's not really a failure. The big error that Saban made was they chose Dante Culpepper over Drew Brees. Obviously, one of the great what-ifs in football history is, well, what if Saban had Brees instead of Culpepper? Is it way different for both, college football and the NFL if that happened? But Saban left the Dolphins of his own choosing. They were very happy with him as head coach. They thought they were building something there. He left to go to Alabama. And here's another funny thing about this. Once again, in terms of how narratives change. When Saban took the Alabama job, now I would say that going back years ago, I never would have said, oh, he's going to be the greatest coach ever, but I assumed that Saban would probably win a national championship at Alabama because he'd won one at LSU. But a lot of people had this idea of Nick Saban as a job hopper. This was in an era when you had some job hoppers, guys that could never seemingly be satisfied in one job. You had like Larry Brown in the NBA or Rick Pitino in college, basketball, or I'm sure the NFL had their own versions of that too, of I'm going to be here, I'm going to hop to here. I guess Bill Belichick at one point in time was a bit like that. I'm here and I'm hopping to there and I'm doing this, I'm doing that. And I think that people thought that Nick Saban was a job hopper because he'd been at Michigan State and he hopped to LSU. And then after a little bit of success at LSU, he hopped to the Dolphins. And then after being the Dolphins for 2 years, he hopped to Alabama. And I think correctly, this is one of the things I got right, said that the actual movement of Saban made some sense. And I didn't think he was going to be looking to leave Alabama anytime soon. I got that right. But the point is not to say how smart I was. The point is that this is another narrative of Nick Saban that had some real legs at the time, is that somehow Nick Saban wouldn't stick around any one job long enough to have any real success because, boy, people were beside themselves in anger. It almost was like being a class traitor, if you know what that is, that Saban was betraying his class, the caste system that he had been born into. This is a guy who can be in the NFL, and he chooses college football over the NFL. How dare he? It felt like such a betrayal of what they think of as the highest, level of sports. And Saban was trashed because of it. It's really interesting. He's a job hopper. He won't stick around any one place for very long, but obviously he would finish his career at Alabama. At least at this point, he has. Well, let's see what else. Gary Roach says, do you remember the song that James Brown made, Dooley's Junkyard Dogs? Do I remember it? I love it. In fact, every Wednesday morning I'm on with my friends at 960 The Rev, or at least the Wednesday mornings that my voice will cooperate, because it's a little bit hard for me to talk on the phone. So a lot of the phone interviews that I try to do during the week, I'm not able to do those as much anymore. So when I can be on the show, I am. But my walk-up song, if you want to call it that, has always been Dooley's Junkyard Dogs, just a kind of a throwback to a great era. So, yeah, Gary, we have great memories of that. Not memories. I don't remember when the song was first written, but when I was a kid going to games, the radio network would play the song and things like that. All right, let's see what else. Let me go to DawgNation.com for a moment. See how they're doing on there. And while I'm pulling that up, I've also got Facebook pulled up here. I'll do a few here. Barry Watkins says, try to explain why Bama owns us right now. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, at one point in time, I felt like I did have an explanation for that, but that explanation doesn't work quite as well as it used to. In 2017 and 2018, look, Alabama was probably still the better program. It just was. And so those losses are a little easier to explain. In 2020, maybe the same thing was still true. In 2021, the SEC championship, that wasn't a must-win game. It was a game in which Georgia knew it was playing for the college football playoff. That year, it won the game it needed to win. It won the national championship. And those explanations, I think, work okay. But when you get to 2023 SEC championship, 2024 regular season, obviously the game this year, well, the explanation of Georgia was building itself into a program, and when it finally had the chance to play Alabama as an equal in a game for all the marbles, it won, which is a storyline that I do think works. Well, that doesn't work quite as well once you think, well, what happened in 23, 24, and 25? Tougher to answer. I don't know. I don't know. Look, here's the one thing I will tell you, and I'm going to take this to a weird place for a second, but it's the best answer I have for you. So my faith is important to me. A lot of people would say the same thing. When you have, deep faith, different people have different personal convictions. Here's a personal conviction I have, and I promise this is going to be an answer to your question. One of my personal convictions about my faith is I don't believe in superstition at all. I don't believe in any form of superstition whatsoever. And so, the idea that, Alabama's just gotten Georgia's number, or somehow there's some sort of hex on Georgia against Alabama, or like the curse of playing Alabama, the same way that when I was younger, people said that about Florida. And what seems true against Alabama was hugely true for Florida, because, listen, some of the games for Georgia against Alabama have come at times in which Georgia was still having more success. So yeah, Georgia's lost these games against Bama, but Georgia also won the SEC championship in 2017. Bama wasn't there. Played for it in 2019. Bama wasn't there. Won the SEC title again in 2022. Bama wasn't there. Won 2 national championships thus far in the 2020s. Alabama hasn't won. I mean, I guess they'll count the 2020, but A, that's technically the final year of the previous decade, and B, it's a pandemic, so it doesn't really count at all. Georgia's won 2 since Alabama won its last one. So the curse that Georgia supposedly has against Alabama is far less significant than the one, supposed curse that Florida had over Georgia, because when Georgia was losing to Florida, it had no other, other than I guess when it won the SEC in 2002, it had no real claims to fame beyond that. Florida was beating Georgia and ruining Georgia's season in the process. Obviously, that's not quite the same thing with Georgia and Alabama now. So, long answer to a short question. I don't believe in superstition, won't allow myself to even consider superstition. So this notion that Georgia just can't play against Alabama, I don't buy that. Clearly that Georgia's made some mistakes against Alabama that it seems to not always make against other teams. That seems true. But a lot of things in life are sort of true until they're not. This may be an example of that, where eventually Georgia has the kinds of success against this opponent that it typically has against other opponents. So not a satisfactory answer, I'm sure, but it's the best I have for now. Barry says every time we lose to Bama, we fuel the fire for ESPN to trash us. That's probably true. That is probably true, and I certainly understand why it feels frustrating because of that. I do. Brent Clark says we don't believe in superstition, but we still wear our lucky shirt on game day, which I do get. And that's one of the things. When I say personal conviction, it doesn't mean it's right or wrong. It's a lot of things are just, like I said, it's just a personal conviction. So for me, I won't really allow myself to have a lucky shirt because every now and then I'll remember, last time I wore this, Georgia won. I do this a lot with shoes where it's like, because I'll typically, like a kid going to his first day of school, I'll buy new shoes before the season begins. And a couple of years ago, the shoes that I bought, boy, Georgia never lost in those shoes. So in my mind, I'm like, maybe I should keep wearing these shoes. It's just fun. I don't really believe the shoes are going to cause Georgia to keep winning, but like, boy, these shoes are undefeated. Do I really want to take these shoes off and start wearing some different shoes? But as I said, people have weird personal convictions. This is one of my weird personal convictions. I won't allow myself to have anything that relates to a superstition. Not because I have to, not because, I'm beholden to that. It's just a personal conviction I've chosen to have. Let's get a few more. So Ken Holcomb brings up something that other people have said. The voice does get better as the show goes along. It's kind of weird. I don't know why that is. But if you'll notice, when I first begin, it's the squeakiest and the worst that it is. And it does get to be a little bit better. I think I've noticed that too, Kent. I don't know what that means. But boy, I tell you this, though, by the time night rolls around, and I try not to speak too much when I'm not doing the show, it's honestly, for someone like me who's away from work, pretty introverted, it's a pretty good excuse of, I can't talk right now. It's one of those things that just gives me a chance to get out of conversations, which is nice. But by the end of the day, boy, I tell you what, man, I have got nothing left. UJ Marine says maybe those championships were the shoes. He says those PF Flyers are guaranteed to make a boy run faster and jump higher. Yeah, I remember those days for sure when you really put a lot of faith in those new shoes you got. I think that's right. Senior Dog 54 says Saban wrote the book on recruiting early on, took it a whole new level. Some of his early rosters were unbelievable. Yeah, at a time in which nobody else was really matching that. And I think that's absolutely right. Is that, the so-called Saban process really was a template. And what was interesting is that unlike a gimmick offense or something like that, even if you knew the steps of the plan, it was still difficult to copy because it required a certain tenacity. And a lot of Saban assistants wanted to try to copy it, but they didn't quite have that tenacity. Well, my gosh, Kirby Smart's got tenacity, barrels full. So he was able to do it. And I've mentioned this before, let's say you're buying or selling your home. As the person who's maybe going through this transaction for a rare time, most people don't buy and sell homes a lot. Some people do, but most people don't. You're fixated on price. If you have a good agent, the agent should be thinking about more than just price. The agent should be thinking about the terms of the deal. Because the thing that's going to impact you the most, believe it or not, is the terms more so than the price. I'll give you, for instance, if you put your home for sale and I come over and say, hey, I'll give you 15% more than what you ask for it, You're like, oh man, that's great. That's a great price. But if I wrap you up in some long-term deal where I've got this long inspection period, I've got all kinds of opportunities to get out of the contract, but you're limiting your recourse to prevent me from doing so, and you can't really do the same thing, I've essentially got you by the barrel. And the price is right, but the terms are wrong. And a good agent should recognize that. My point in telling you this is that I think that Kirby Smart operated that way when he, as a first-time head coach, became the Georgia coach. I've heard a lot of stories from, first-time coaches. They're so fixated on the salary. Oh my gosh, you're going to pay me X number of millions of dollars. Where do I sign? They don't even get to the terms. And I believe that Kirby Smart, who had been biding his time to become a head coach, he knew he was going to be one. It was simply a matter of when's it going to happen. Well, when the opportunity came available to him, he's like, okay, here's the price, how much you're going to have to pay me. But now let's talk about the terms. Here is what I need organizationally in order to put this process that I've spent all these years learning into place. And do not discount that. It's really interesting to go back and relive 2016. We think about 2017 because that's when Georgia broke through in the field. But in 2016, even while doing double duty to Alabama, Kirby hit the ground running. And early groundwork was laid for the recruiting success that Georgia had in the class of 2017 that resulted in the first breakthrough on the field. All of that happened. And the story that probably doesn't get told as much as maybe it should, because it's hard for me to know what's true and what's not. Supposedly, Kirby would have been the Auburn coach in, say, 2012, but Auburn didn't want him coaching for Alabama to finish off that season. Georgia allowed him to, and in exchange for that, Kirby did double duty very well. They probably had the best signing class that a rookie head coach ever had, while also working for part of that time in Alabama. The legend has it, and who knows if this is true? Who knows if it's true? Maybe it's been reported. It's hard to remember what has been and what's just campfire stories. But the legend has it that if Auburn would have allowed Kirby to do that in 2012, he would have become their head coach. He didn't, and they haven't been the same since then. Savannah Bryan says, as a realtor, you sound like a dream client. There's much more at stake than the price. Well, Brian, I'm glad to hear that. I didn't realize you were a realtor. I can imagine being a realtor down in Savannah must be a lot of fun. Beautiful properties. My gosh. I love real estate. I love especially historic properties. In Savannah, you can go tour a lot of these homes. You can go see what they call the Mercer Williams house. That's the famous house from the Midnight in the Garden of Good and Evil. You can see that. You can go over Tybee Island, see those gorgeous coastal cottages and things like that. My gosh, what a great place. What a great place to be in real estate. That's amazing. Jeremy Smith says he was a head high school baseball coach for 17 years and really superstitious. Yeah, so of all of the sports superstitions, ain't nothing superstitious like a baseball superstition. And so on a baseball field, because my son plays baseball, I won't step on the lines and things like that. But that's more of adherence to a tradition than a superstition, which I said before. The whole thing about superstition for me is just a personal conviction. It's not a law or a rule or a commandment. It's just a personal conviction of mine. But on a baseball field, because so many baseball superstitions are just essentially traditions at this point, I don't step on lines. I don't do some of that kind of stuff. Savannah Bryan says he'll set me up with a beach house at Tybee Island. Listen, I'd give anything if that was the let me see if I can get my kids to get through school, and we'll see about doing that after that. Let me go back to we'll take one more trip around the comment section. So Felicia Veal Green writes in to say, your explanation about curses was both confusing and amusing. I'm with you and I don't believe it. So I would say that that's a pretty good description for me overall. Confusing and amusing. And as long as the amusing is at least equal to the confusing, then we're probably in pretty good shape. I'd say that's about the best I can hope for. Let's see what else. Brian Whitaker says he wears the same shirt every week on game day and won't swap until we lose. Yeah, there are a lot of Georgia fans that do some version of that. When I was a kid and I used to watch games at home a lot, my superstition was Georgia always played better when I sat on the floor. And for whatever reason, I've always been somebody that like sits on the floor. I've always, like you go to somebody's house and like, if it's a crowded living room, I just sit on the floor. I've never cared about sitting on the floor. I don't know why that is. Kirby's talking about eating on the floor. I've never eaten off the floor, but I have sat on the floor a lot. Sitting on the floor is no big deal to me for whatever reason. But people think that's like this, aghast. But I've never mind sitting on the floor because I used to sit on the floor when I was a kid. And so if I was sitting in a chair, I felt like that Georgia played bad. But if I was sitting on the floor, Georgia played better. That's obviously superstitious nonsense. But there was a time in my life when that was one of the things that I did was like, oh, I better sit on the floor so Georgia will play better. There was definitely some of that. I also remember, because to me, nothing is nerve-wracking like baseball is. I mean, you watch the World Series now. Baseball's so nerve-wracking. Now, my son plays baseball, so you're going to get wrapped up in those games. But I'm talking about if I walk by a park where a game is taking place, just the natural act of baseball is such a nerve-wracking sport to me. And so when the Braves first started getting really good in like 91, 92, this is not necessarily a superstition, although I guess it sort of functioned like one, is I couldn't really watch a lot of the moments in those games. I'd close my eyes, I'd look away. I remember I'd, bury my face in my arms. When, Francisco Cabrera got the base hit against Sid Bream not against Sid Bream, but against Stan Belinda that scored Bream in 1992. I mean, if I'm being honest, I was probably watching it like this. I mean, not like just watching it. I probably had my eyes covered because it's just nerve-wracking. So that was definitely a thing back then of, Georgia games, I guess my superstition was I like to sit on the floor. But for a lot of those early Braves games, they were first getting good and the playoff tension was almost more than you could stand. I'd just turn away. I'd look away. I couldn't watch. I remember. I was also very young. So keep that in mind. Wildman Slayer says his dad sat on the floor a lot while watching TV. So yeah, maybe I come in good company with Mr. Slayer. So maybe I'm in good company there. Morven Brooks says he used to do all kinds of things to try to get the Braves to win games in the mid to late 80s. Well, as someone as a small child who lived through that era, I can tell you that whatever you tried did not work. So rabbit's foot, salt over the shoulder, whatever good luck you're trying to conjure back then, it didn't work. Because I want to say, I think they finished last at least 5 years in a row, right? And I want to say they lost 100 games, 86, 87, 88, 89, 90. Maybe it's 5. Yeah. Didn't they lose 100 games at least 5 years in a row? 86 is about when I came in on them. That's about the first sports year I can really remember. 85, 86, somewhere around that time. And the reason why the 91 Braves are such a big deal is the only memory I had ever had, and I was a big baseball fan, big Braves fan, watched them every night watched the Braves. They lost 100 games a year, every year. They'd won the division like 4 years prior, but I had no memory of that. I didn't know anything about that. I loved Dale Murphy, loved Bob Horner, loved, some of the guys they had, but they lost 100 games every year. Gregory Bradley says the coach Rick had beautiful homes on Lake Hartwell. I'll tell you this. I told somebody about Lake Hartwell the other day. Who was I talking about that? Gorgeous, gorgeous, gorgeous place up there. Love it. A lot of Clemson fans up there, but a gorgeous place for sure. All right. We got to go. Anything else? Let me go back to DawgNation.com one more time. At DawgNation.
This is news that just came out.
All right, we got some breaking news.
The 2028 season national championship game will be played in Tampa.
Well, there you go.
So,
there you go. Do you like Tampa, Cody? You been to Tampa?
I have not been to Raymond James. Never been. I've been around Tampa. I've been a Braves spring training, but I have not been to Raymond James. So we'll at least get to experience that for Georgia, Florida in a couple years.
This is the first time, I know you don't know, I'm putting you on the spot. This is the first time since Santa Clara, and I guess Indianapolis too. I'm trying to think of non-New Year's Six venues that have also hosted national championships. So Tampa would be there with Indianapolis, and Santa Clara from 2018 season or somewhere around that time. The kind of one-off things, because mostly it's Miami, Atlanta, New Orleans, these venues that also host. Of course, I guess LA was at SoFi, so this happens maybe more frequently.
Yeah. So and then next year, so 26. So this season it's Hard Rock in Miami.
Mm-hmm.
Then it goes to Allegiant in Vegas.
Yeah.
Into the January 27.
That's the one I'd love to be at. Boy, I'd love for Georgia to be in that game. That'd be so much fun.
Yeah. And then you got Superdome, Raymond James, and then Hard Rock again in 2030.
Yeah, that'd be a lot of fun. That'd be a lot of fun. So hopefully Georgia's still a part of all that. All right, so let's go. SEM Dog says, thanks for bringing up some bad memories from my teens. Really appreciate it. Yeah, there you go. This is that kind of week, right, where we have both good memories and bad memories. Obviously, a lot of us are still powered by some of what we experienced in the Georgia-Florida game. Jamie Scott asking about DJ Lagway holding onto the ball. That's an interesting question. Been sacked a little bit. I do expect, Kirby said this week he thinks they're going to play fast. I think they're going to try to do things to make Lagway comfortable. And when you're comfortable, you typically play faster. So you may be on to something with that, Jamie. You may be on to something. All right, we got to go for right now. Thanks for being here. Y'all check out RS Andrews online, rsandrews.com. Air conditioning, heating, plumbing, electric needs. They show up on time. They do the work that's promised. The price is promised. You can trust them on all of that. Hope you have a great day. Get your heating system tuned up. It's been cold. Our heat's been on. It's been kind of that miserable weather, and you want to stay toasty and warm, cozy inside your house. RS Andrews will help you do that. We love that. And don't forget, later on today, we've had a lot of success. People seem to like dropping the show on Wednesday. We'll give you Go With The Flow, presented by RS Andrews, later on this evening on the DawgNation video channel. So enjoy that. We're back tomorrow as well. DawgNation Daily, presented by Breda Pest Management. We'll look forward to talking to you then.